Welcome to my channel. This channel is dedicated to horror stories.
The sun beat down mercilessly as I trudged through the familiar streets of my small California town. High school graduation had come and gone, leaving me with little more than a sense of uncertainty about the future. With college out of reach and bills piling up, I knew I needed to find a job, and fast. As if in answer to my prayers, a neon-lit sign caught my eye. Now hiring, it proclaimed in bold letters, beckoning me towards the golden arches of the local McDonald's. With a sigh of resignation, I pushed open the door and stepped inside, the cool blast of air conditioning a welcome relief from the sweltering heat outside. Behind the counter stood a tired-looking manager, his eyes scanning over a stack of resumes with a sense of resignation. I approached him tentatively, clearing my throat to announce my presence. "Excuse me, sir," I began, my voice cracking slightly with nerves. "I saw your sign outside. Are you still hiring?" The manager glanced up, his expression unreadable. After a moment of consideration, he nodded curtly. "Fill out an application, and we'll see if you're what we're looking for," he replied, his tone brusque. I nodded eagerly, relieved to have made some progress. As I filled out the application, my mind raced with thoughts of potential co-workers, job responsibilities, and of course, the all-important paycheck that would soon be mine. Just as I finished scribbling my signature at the bottom of the page, a voice interrupted my thoughts. "Hey there, newbie." I looked up to see a fellow employee, a young man with a mischievous twinkle in his eye, grinning at me from behind the counter. "Welcome to the team," he continued, extending a hand in greeting. "Name's Dave. Been slinging burgers here for about a year now." I shook his hand eagerly, grateful for the warm welcome. "I'm Jack," I replied, returning his grin. "Just got hired today." Dave's grin widened as he clapped me on the back. "Well, Jack, you're in for a wild ride," he said with a laugh. "But trust me, working at Mickey D's ain't all bad. We've got a good crew here, and the pay ain't half bad either." I nodded, feeling a surge of optimism coursing through my veins. Maybe this job wouldn't be so bad after all. With Dave's friendly guidance and the promise of a steady paycheck, I felt ready to take on whatever challenges McDonald's had in store for me. Little did I know, the night ahead would test my courage in ways I never could have imagined. But for now, as I stepped behind the counter and donned my newly minted uniform, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement for the adventures that lay ahead. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I settled into my first shift at McDonald's, the scent of frying oil and sizzling burgers filling the air. Despite the hustle and bustle of the busy restaurant, an uneasy feeling gnawed at the edges of my mind, a sense that something was not quite right. As I went about my tasks, taking orders, flipping burgers, and serving customers with a forced smile, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was as if a pair of unseen eyes bore into the back of my skull, sending shivers down my spine. I glanced around nervously, trying to pinpoint the source of my unease. That's when I saw her, a woman in a tattered raincoat, her dark hair framing a pale face with unnervingly focused eyes. She sat alone in a dimly lit corner of the restaurant, her gaze never wavering from my direction. I felt a chill run down my spine as our eyes met, a sense of dread creeping over me like a shadow. Who was she, and why was she staring at me with such intensity? Lost in my thoughts, I barely noticed as a customer approached the counter, snapping me out of my reverie. I forced a smile, my hands shaking slightly as I punched in their order. "Is everything okay, kid?" Dave, my coworker, asked, his brow furrowing with concern. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied, forcing a laugh. "Just a little spooked, I guess. That woman over there, she's been staring at me all night." Dave followed my gaze to where the woman sat, his expression turning serious. That's odd, he murmured, his eyes narrowing as he studied her intently. I've never seen her around here before. You sure you're okay? I nodded, though the knot of fear in my stomach refused to loosen its grip. Yeah, I'll be fine, I muttered, turning my attention back to the task at hand. But try as I might to push the woman's unsettling presence from my mind. Their gaze lingered like a shadow, a constant reminder of the unease that hung heavy in the air. As the night wore on and the restaurant began to empty out, the woman remained, her solitary figure a stark contrast to the bustling activity around her. I tried to focus on my work, to ignore the feeling of her eyes boring into me, but it was no use. The sense of unease only grew stronger with each passing moment, a silent warning of the horrors that were yet to come. As the evening at McDonald's progressed, the usual hustle and bustle gradually subsided, leaving behind an eerie silence that seemed to hang heavy in the air. I found myself alone behind the counter, the only sound the soft sizzle of burgers on the grill and the occasional beep of the cash register. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the empty restaurant, causing me to jump in surprise. I spun around to see my coworker Dave collapsing to the floor, his body slumping against the fryer. Dave, I cried out, rushing to his side. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and uneven. Panic surged through me as I knelt beside him, unsure of what to do. Dave, can you hear me? I asked, shaking his shoulder gently. There was no response, and a sense of helplessness washed over me like a tidal wave. Just then, Dave's eyes fluttered open, his gaze unfocused and confused. What happened? He murmured, his voice slurred. I don't know, man, I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. You'd just collapse out of nowhere. Dave struggled to sit up, his brow furrowed in confusion. I don't remember, he muttered, his words trailing off. I helped him to his feet, my mind racing with questions. What had caused Dave to collapse so suddenly? And why couldn't he remember what had happened? As I led Dave to the back of the restaurant to sit down, a chill ran down my spine. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone in the empty restaurant. Just then, a loud banging noise filled the air, causing me to jump in surprise. I glanced around frantically, searching for the source of the sound, but there was nothing, just the empty, dimly lit dining area stretching out before me. My hands trembling, I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling with the buttons as I tried to dial for help. But before I could even finish dialing, the phone slipped from my grasp, clattering to the floor with a loud crash. I stared at it in disbelief, my heart pounding in my chest. What was happening? And why did it feel like the walls of the restaurant were closing in around me, suffocating me with their oppressive silence? Desperate for answers, I turned to Dave, only to find him staring off into the distance, his expression vacant and far away. Dave, I called out, my voice trembling with fear. Are you okay? But there was no response, and as I watched in horror, Dave's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the floor once more, his body convulsing with silent sobs. Terrified and alone, I realized that whatever was happening in this McDonald's was far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. And as the night stretched on, the true horrors of the restaurant began to reveal themselves, plunging me into a nightmare from which I feared I would never awaken. The chaos of Dave's collapse seemed to linger in the air long after he had been helped to the back of the restaurant. I stood alone behind the counter, my heart still racing with fear and confusion. The feeling of being watched had intensified, and I couldn't shake the sense that something sinister lurked just out of sight. As I glanced nervously around the empty dining area, a sudden realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. The doors were locked. Frantically, I rushed to the nearest exit, pulling and tugging at the handle with all my strength, but it refused to budge. Panic surged through me as I realized the gravity of the situation. We were trapped, trapped inside this McDonald's with no way out. My mind raced with a million questions. How had the doors become locked? Who or what was responsible? And most importantly, how were we going to escape? Desperate for answers, I turned to Dave, who was now sitting slumped against the wall, his face drawn and pale. "Dave, did you lock the doors?" I asked, my voice trembling with fear. Dave shook his head weakly, his eyes wide with confusion. "No, Jack, I swear I didn't touch them," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's going on." I felt a surge of frustration and helplessness wash over me. If Dave hadn't locked the doors, then who had? And why? As I pondered these questions, the chill ran down my spine, and I realized that the silence of the restaurant had taken on a sinister quality. It was as if the very walls were closing in around us, suffocating us with their oppressive stillness. With a sense of mounting dread, I turned back to the doors, my hands shaking as I tried once again to force them open. But no matter how hard I pushed and pulled, they remained firmly shut, as if mocking my futile attempts to escape. I glanced around the restaurant, searching desperately for another way out, but the windows were all barred, and the emergency exits were sealed shut. It was as if the restaurant itself had become a prison, trapping us within its walls with no hope of escape. As the realization sank in, a sense of hopelessness washed over me, and I knew that we were truly at the mercy of whatever dark forces were at work in this place. With each passing moment, the darkness seemed to close in around us, and I feared that we were running out of time. Alone and afraid, I could only pray that help would come soon before it was too late. But deep down, I knew that in this place of nightmares, the odds of survival were slim, and our chances of escape were growing slimmer by the minute. As the realization of being locked inside the McDonald's set in, a palpable sense of unease hung heavy in the air. With no way out and the feeling of being watched intensifying, I knew that something sinister was at play. But amidst the chaos, my attention was drawn to the table where the mysterious woman in the raincoat had sat. Approaching cautiously, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that washed over me with each step. The dimly lit corner seemed to exude an eerie energy, as if it held the key to the mystery surrounding us. Reaching the table, I noticed that the woman was gone, leaving behind only her tattered raincoat hanging over the back of the chair like a spectral reminder of her presence. But as I moved closer, something caught my eye, a crumpled tissue lying forgotten on the table. With trembling hands, I picked it up, unfolding it to reveal jagged, frantic handwriting scrawled across its surface. My heart raced as I read the words, a chill running down my spine with each passing moment. "Convince them, or they will think it is you." The message was ominous, cryptic, and unsettling, leaving more questions than answers. Who had written it? And what did they mean by "convince them"? Lost in thought, I barely noticed Dave approaching from behind, his expression filled with concern. "Jack, what's going on?" he asked, his voice low with fear. "What's that you're holding?" I turned to face him, the tissue clenched tightly in my hand. "It's a message," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "From the woman in the raincoat." Dave's eyes widened in surprise. "What did it say?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. I hesitated, unsure of how to explain the chilling words written on the tissue. It's a warning," I replied finally. "A warning that if we don't convince them, they'll think it's us." Dave frowned, clearly puzzled by my cryptic answer. "Convince who?" he asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. I shook my head, my mind racing with possibilities. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice trembling with fear. "But whoever wrote this, they know something about what's happening here, and we need to find out what it is before it's too late." With those ominous words hanging in the air, Dave and I exchanged a worried glance, knowing that whatever lay ahead would test our courage in ways we never could have imagined. But as we braced ourselves for the horrors yet to come, one thing was certain. The mysteries of the McDonald's were far from over, and the truth was darker and more twisted than we could have ever imagined. Haunted by the cryptic message left by the mysterious woman in the raincoat, Dave and I delved deeper into the unsettling mysteries of the McDonald's. The eerie silence of the restaurant seemed to amplify the sense of dread that hung heavy in the air, as if the very walls themselves were whispering secrets of the past. Driven by a desperate need for answers, we ventured into the back of the restaurant, our footsteps echoing off the linoleum floor. The dim light cast long shadows, adding to the ominous atmosphere that surrounded us. As we searched through the cluttered storage area, my eyes fell upon a section of the wall that seemed oddly out of place. With a sense of trepidation, I approached, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you think is back there?" Dave asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head, my hands trembling as I reached out to touch the wall. "I'm not sure," I replied, my voice tinged with uncertainty. "But there's something strange about this wall. It's like it's hiding something." With a deep breath, I pushed against the wall, expecting resistance. To my surprise, it gave way with a creak, revealing a small, dusty room that seemed frozen in time. Dave and I exchanged a wary glance before stepping inside, our footsteps echoing off the walls. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, adding to the sense of foreboding that surrounded us. As we explored the room, our eyes fell upon old yellowed newspaper clippings lining the walls. With a sense of trepidation, I reached out to touch one, my fingers trembling as I read the headline. "Devastating fire at local business claims numerous lives." I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. But this happened decades ago. Dave's eyes widened in shock as he scanned the clippings, his expression filled with horror. Do you think this has something to do with what's happening here?" he asked, his voice filled with fear. I nodded, my mind racing with possibilities. "I think so," I replied, my voice tinged with uncertainty. I think the spirits of those who died in the fire are haunting this place, and we're caught in the middle of it." As the gravity of our situation sank in, Dave and I exchanged a worried glance, knowing that the horrors of the past were far from over. With each passing moment, the echoes of the tragedy grew louder, threatening to consume us in their wake. But as we braced ourselves for the terrors yet to come, one thing was certain. The secrets of the McDonald's were darker and more twisted than we could have ever imagined. And if we were to survive the night, we would need to confront the ghosts of the past head-on, no matter the cost. Armed with the knowledge of the tragic past that haunted the McDonald's, Dave and I steeled ourselves for the confrontation ahead. The air in the restaurant was heavy with the weight of the spirit's anguish, their presence looming over us like a dark cloud. With determination in our hearts, we ventured back into the dining area, our senses alert for any sign of the restless souls that roamed the restaurant. As we moved cautiously through the dimly lit space, the oppressive silence was broken only by the sound of our own footsteps echoing off the walls. Suddenly, a chilling wail filled the air, causing us to freeze in our tracks. We turned to see the ghostly apparitions materializing before us, their ethereal forms twisted in agony and rage. "We have to confront them," I said, my voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at my insides. "We have to make them understand that we mean no harm." Dave nodded, his jaw set in determination. "Agreed," he replied, his voice resolute. "But how do we do that?" I paused, my mind racing for a solution. Then a thought occurred to me, a way to communicate with the spirits and convince them of our innocence. "The message," I said suddenly, a spark of realization igniting within me. "We need to use the message to reach out to them." Dave frowned, clearly puzzled by my suggestion. "But how?" he asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "We'll write our own message," I explained, my words coming out in a rush. We'll tell them that we had nothing to do with the fire, that we're just innocent bystanders caught up in all of this, and then we'll see if they'll listen. With a sense of urgency, Dave and I set to work, scribbling our message onto a crumpled napkin with trembling hands. As we wrote, the spirits drew closer, their presence looming over us like a dark shadow. Once the message was complete, we held it up for the spirits to see, our hearts pounding in our chests. "Please," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "Please listen to us. We mean no harm. We just want to understand." For a moment, there was silence, a tense, expectant pause that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Then, slowly but surely, the spirits began to fade away, their ethereal forms dissipating into thin air. Dave and I exchanged a stunned glance, unable to believe what had just happened. Did it work?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. I nodded, a sense of relief washing over me. "I think so," I replied, my voice tinged with disbelief. I think they heard us." As the last of the spirits vanished into the darkness, Dave and I let out a sigh of relief, knowing that we had finally made peace with the restless souls that haunted the McDonald's. But as we braced ourselves for the challenges yet to come, one thing was certain. The horrors of the night were far from over, and the truth of the McDonald's would continue to unravel in ways we never could have imagined. With the spirits appeased, Dave and I were left to grapple with the unsettling truths that had been unearthed within the walls of the McDonald's. As we sat in the dimly lit dining area, the weight of the night's events hung heavy in the air, casting a shadow over our thoughts. "We need to figure out what happened here," Dave said, breaking the tense silence that enveloped us. "We need to understand why this place is haunted." I nodded in agreement, my mind racing with questions. "But how do we find out?" I asked, my voice tinged with uncertainty. "How do we uncover the truth of what happened all those years ago?" Dave glanced around the restaurant, his eyes scanning the empty space as if searching for answers. "We start by looking for clues," he replied, his voice filled with determination. "We search the archives, talk to anyone who might know something. We leave no stone unturned until we find the truth." With a sense of purpose, Dave and I set to work, scouring the restaurant for any sign of the past that had been hidden away. We combed through old newspaper clippings, searched for records of the fire that had claimed so many lives, and spoke to anyone who might have a connection to the tragedy. As the hours passed, a clearer picture began to emerge, a tale of greed, betrayal, and unspeakable tragedy. We learned of the owner of the McDonald's, a man named Mr. Sanders, who had been suspected of setting the fire for insurance money. We heard stories of the victims, innocent people whose lives had been cut short by the flames. But amidst the darkness, there were also glimmers of hope, a community that had come together in the face of adversity, a determination to seek justice for those who had been wronged. "We have to tell their story," I said, my voice filled with conviction. "We have to make sure that the truth is known, that their voices are heard." Dave nodded, his eyes shining with determination. "We owe it to them," he replied, his voice tinged with emotion. "We owe it to all those who lost their lives in this tragedy." With renewed purpose, Dave and I set to work, determined to uncover the truth and bring closure to those who had been affected by the horrors of the past. And as we braced ourselves for the challenges yet to come, one thing was certain. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with obstacles and dangers. But with each step forward, we moved closer to unraveling the mysteries of the McDonald's and uncovering the truth that had been hidden for so long. As Dave and I delved deeper into the tragic history of the McDonald's, we uncovered more layers of darkness and despair. But amidst the shadows, there were also glimmers of hope, stories of resilience, compassion, and the enduring power of redemption. Driven by a shared sense of purpose, We reached out to members of the community who had been affected by the tragedy, listening to their stories and offering our support. It was through these conversations that we began to understand the true impact of the fire and the lives it had irrevocably changed. One such conversation took place with Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who had lost her husband in the blaze. As we sat with her in her modest living room, she shared memories of her husband, the laughter they had shared, the dreams they had built together, and the pain of losing him in the fire. "He was a good man," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice filled with sorrow. "He didn't deserve what happened to him." Dave and I listened intently, our hearts heavy with empathy. "We're so sorry for your loss," I said, my voice tinged with emotion. "We're here to help in any way we can." Mrs. Thompson nodded, a faint smile crossing her lips. "Thank you," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for caring." As we left Mrs. Thompson's house, Dave and I were filled with a renewed sense of determination. We knew that we couldn't undo the pain and suffering that had been caused by the fire, but we could work to ensure that those who had been affected found the closure and redemption they so desperately needed. "We have to make this right," Dave said, his voice firm with resolve. "We have to bring justice to those who were wronged." I nodded in agreement, my mind already racing with plans for how we could make a difference. "We'll start by gathering more evidence," I replied, my voice filled with determination. "We'll talk to anyone who might have information about what really happened that night. And we won't stop until we uncover the truth." With a sense of purpose burning bright within us, Dave and I set out once more, determined to bring closure to the victims of the McDonald's tragedy and find redemption for all those who had been touched by its dark legacy. And as we faced the challenges yet to come, we knew that with each step forward, we moved closer to finding the justice and peace that had eluded us for so long. In the aftermath of our journey through the dark and twisted history of the McDonald's, Dave and I found ourselves at a crossroads, faced with the daunting task of moving forward from the horrors of the past. But amidst the shadows, there was also a glimmer of hope, a chance to build a brighter future out of the ashes of tragedy. With a newfound sense of purpose, Dave and I continued our quest for justice, gathering evidence and speaking to witnesses in our pursuit of the truth. Each piece of information brought us closer to uncovering the secrets that had been hidden for so long, and with each step forward, we felt the weight of the past lifting from our shoulders. But as we worked tirelessly to bring closure to the victims of the McDonald's tragedy, we also found solace in the bonds that had been forged between us. Through the trials and tribulations we had faced together, Dave and I had become more than just friends. We had become allies, united in our quest for redemption. "We're making progress," Dave said one evening, his voice filled with a quiet sense of satisfaction. "We're getting closer to the truth." I nodded in agreement, a sense of pride swelling within me. "We won't stop until we find it," I replied, my voice firm with determination. "We owe it to everyone who was affected by what happened here." As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Dave and I worked tirelessly to uncover the truth, never wavering in our commitment to justice. And finally, after months of hard work and dedication, our efforts were rewarded. "We did it," Dave said, his voice filled with awe as we stood outside the McDonald's one evening, the sun setting in the distance. "We found the evidence we needed to bring Mr. Sanders to justice." I smiled, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. "It's not over yet," I replied, my voice tinged with anticipation. "But it's a step in the right direction." And as we stood together in the fading light, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, Dave and I would face them together, united in our determination to bring closure to the victims of the McDonald's tragedy and ensure that justice was served. For in the end, it was our bond that had carried us through the darkness, and it would be our bond that would light the way forward into a brighter tomorrow.